Hey there. Before we get to the episode, I have a quick question for you. Have you been unsuccessfully trying to shake that feeling that you're forgetting something when it comes to your wedding? You've got the Knot app and you've downloaded countless other planning checklists, but you just can't get rid of that sneaking suspicion that there's something you don't know yet. It's a very common feeling when it comes to wedding planning. So much so that I decided to put together a free resource to help get rid of what I call FOWO, the fear of wedding oversight. Yes, it does include that 12-month task checklist, but that's just the start. In addition to the ultimate wedding planning checklist, my new Don't Forget list also includes a wedding vendor checklist, your shopping list, a packing list for the wedding weekend, and a complete wedding item setup list to make sure that you are truly not forgetting anything when it comes to your wedding. And you heard me right. This list is free for you to grab right now. Just head over to planningcollective.com/forgetting and it's all yours. That's planningcollective.com/FORGETTING and let's get rid of that FOWO together. All right, let's get on to the episode. Hi there, I'm Kate McClellan, and I've been a professional wedding planner for over 20 years now. I started Planning Collective when I noticed that though most couples are super excited about getting engaged, they quickly feel overwhelmed and intimidated by the actual process of planning their weddings. If left unchecked, this can lead to massive burnout and the urge to scrap all your plans and just elope. While this is totally normal, you don't have to sacrifice your sanity for your dream wedding. In the Wedding Planning Collective podcast, I'm going to share the processes, tips, and tools that all engaged couples like you need to feel confident, supported, and excited about your wedding plans again. Let's get started. Hey guys, Kate here. Welcome back to another episode of the Wedding Planning Collective podcast. Over the past few episodes, we have been discussing some of the really important steps that you need to take before you start booking anything regarding your wedding. Last week, we talked about what you need to know before you look or book your perfect venue. So this week, we're going to move on to chat about building out the rest of your vendor team. Remember though, just like everything else when it comes to wedding planning, it's all about building out your details on a strong foundation. So if you're just finding this podcast at this episode, welcome. I'm glad you joined us. But I would recommend that you start back on episode 112 through 116, which is the Wedding Planning Blueprint series. This is where I talk about all of those base foundational steps, and it is so important for you to start there when it comes to planning your wedding. So again, that's episode 112 through 116, and you can find those on whatever podcast platform you are listening on or over on YouTube. You can also get free access to the full series along with the workbook and the other resources that I do mention throughout the series at planningcollective.com/blueprint. Okay, now that you have a strong foundation for your wedding and you found your perfect venue, it's time to start building out the rest of your vendor team. And I know that can feel so overwhelming. So today we're going to break it all down. We're going to start with talking about which vendors you actually need, because not every couple needs every vendor, the best order to book your vendors so you don't miss out on your favorites, how to find and book the right vendors for your wedding, and what to expect from vendor meetings, including any red flags that you might need to look out for. Finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about wedding planners and how they fit into the mix and what you need to know about full service versus day of and all of that. So by the end of this episode, you will have a clear game plan to book your vendor team with confidence and less stress. Let's get started. First, what vendors do you actually need? Once you've booked your venue, the next step is to start securing your vendor team. Now, there are core vendors that most couples will work with, and this includes your officiant, a caterer, music, ceremony and reception, a photographer, florist, a baker or dessert vendor, a hair and makeup team, and a stationer for your invites, signage, and all of that. Beyond that, there are other vendors that might be important to you, but aren't technically required for every wedding. And these vendors include a wedding planner or day of coordinator, videographer, transportation, rentals like chairs, tents, decor items, any specialty lighting, and photo booths. Let's talk about the core vendors that most couples will have for their wedding. Now, again, every wedding is different, every couple is different. So go back to your priorities. Your core vendors might look a little bit different than what we're going to talk about here, but that's fine. This is just to give you an idea of the booking order that I recommend most couples follow through. So let's talk about the order you should be booking in so you don't miss out on any of your preferred vendors. In the list of all of the vendors you're going to need for the wedding, the core vendors or your first priority are the ones that can typically only take one wedding per day. The wedding industry is full of a lot of small businesses, and a lot of planners, photographers, DJs are the only person working in their company, or maybe they have assistants or second photographers. But once they are booked, they're booked. They can't take multiple events, definitely multiple events in one day, some not even multiple events in one weekend. So that is where I'm saying you want to start with. You want to start with those vendors that once they're booked, they're booked. Now, again, this is going to include your venue for the most part. Most venues, now, of course, there are some that can offer multiple events, but most venues, you obviously need to book before you get your date. Photographers typically fall into that category, along with a DJ or a band and your wedding planner if you're hiring one. Now, in the second priority, meaning you're going to book after those other core vendors, typically is those vendors that can do multiple events or they might have a little bit more flexibility. And often I find that's your caterer, officiants, florists, hair and makeup team, videographer, and rentals like tables, chairs, etc. A quick note on why catering isn't in the first group of priorities. I do go back and forth on this because it really depends on your venue and how the other vendors fit into your overall plan. If you're hosting a backyard wedding or using a unique venue, like we discussed in last week's episode, securing a caterer earlier in the process is key since it will take up a significant portion of your budget. That said, most catering companies can accommodate multiple weddings or multiple events in any day, which is why they typically fall into this second group. So, from an availability standpoint, it's less urgent to get in their calendar than those that can only book one per day. However, unless you have an unlimited budget, I highly recommend prioritizing catering and large rentals like your tents and tables and chairs earlier in the planning process so you have a solid foundation on your budget before you book everything else. Now, the last category, the less urgent, again, not saying that they are not important in your big day, but these vendors can often handle multiple weddings per day, or maybe they're not even date specific. So their availability is definitely more flexible. And that's going to be transportation, photo booth, or other reception entertainment, lighting companies, a stationer who, again, isn't necessarily even connected to your actual date, and the baker for your wedding cake or desserts. One final time, this isn't to say that these vendors are less important. That's all based on your priorities. But the bottom line, if a vendor can only do one wedding per day, book them early on. If they can juggle multiple weddings, then you have a little bit more time to book them. All right, let's talk about how to find and book the right vendors. First off, if you are working with a planner or if you have a contact at your venue, check with them to see who they prefer working with. A lot of times, if you're building your team out of people that like working together or they are familiar with your venue, it gets you off to a great start as you know that they're familiar with working together. Ask family or friends that maybe recently planned a graduation or another wedding. Who did they love working with and who did they not love working with? You can also ask any other vendors that you're currently working with if they have any preferred vendors in the categories that you're still looking for help with. Taking things over to social media, try searching with location-based hashtags like hashtag Michigan Wedding Planner or hashtag Houston Wedding Band. I know that the hashtag feature isn't used quite as much as it used to be, but I will say it is still a great feature to use for search as it can help you find the vendors that are in your area. And finally, look at vendor listings on sites like The Knot or Wedding Wire, but make sure that you're prioritizing reviews over their placement on the page or the awards that you see given. The placement and awards are based solely on the vendor's participation in their advertising, while the reviews are based on the client's experience. I do know a lot of amazing vendors that receive those awards year after year and they're in the top placement, but I also know some not so great ones that always promote that they've won this award year after year, and I know it's simply because they advertise with the Knot or Wedding Wire. In episode 117, we talked about the things that many couples overthink when it comes to planning their wedding. And I want to remind you here that you do not need to reach out to every vendor out there. In most areas, you're going to find an endless list of vendors in each category. You will go absolutely insane if you try to connect with each one while tracking the pros and cons for each of them. I recommend making a short list of 5 to 10 possible options in each category, depending on where that vendor lands in your list of priorities. Reach out to them and get availability and general pricing. And from there, you can pick your top 3 to set up a time to actually chat or meet with them in person. Using this process, you're likely to find the perfect fit within those top 3. However, if you're not feeling the vibes from that first group, then you start with another group of 3 so it doesn't feel so overwhelmed. I also recommend trying to tackle one vendor category at a time, again, so it doesn't get so overwhelming. If you're short on time, you may need to start with multiple vendors at any given time. But if you have a year or more to plan, give yourself a little break and just focus on one vendor at a time. Let's talk a little bit about vendor meetings, what to expect and ask once you set up some of these meetings with the vendors. The list is obviously very long with what questions you might want to ask. I have a full list of questions for you to ask the different vendors, broken down by category. Make sure you find that at planningcollective.com/vendor questions. Some important ones, though, are you available on the date? Have you worked at my venue before? What's included in your package? And also, what is not included in the package, like setup fees, tax, gratuity, and then ask them how their payment structure works. Again, there are a lot more questions that we're just not going to get into within this episode, but grab your list over at planningcollective.com/vendor questions. Let's talk about personalities of your vendors for just a second. Well, it's obviously ideal if you get along with all of your vendors. The truth is, if you're not besties with your stationer or baker, as long as you're happy with their work, it's not really going to impact your wedding day. However, there are some vendors that you'll be spending a lot of time with on the wedding day and throughout the planning process. So personality is going to make a bigger difference. And these vendors are going to include your planner, photographer, and DJ or MC, as they really set the tone of the reception. So not just for you, but for all of your guests. So keep this in mind as you are talking to vendors in the planning process. Your photographer in particular will be following you around all day and helping guide you through the photo process. If in a consultation, you're just not feeling the vibe, trust your gut and keep looking. And finally, let's talk a little bit about wedding planners and whether or not you need one. Probably don't need to tell you that I'm a little bit biased on this one, but hiring a wedding planner or coordinator can be a total game changer. But of course, it's not going to be in everyone's budget. But do you really need a wedding planner? And at what level of service do you need? So let's break it down. Full service wedding planning is for couples that want somebody involved in the entire planning process. A full service planner is going to be involved ideally from the very beginning with your budget, finding your venue, and then building out the rest of your vendor team. Of course, they also get involved in the design and logistics, anything that's going to be involved in your wedding day. If you're thinking of booking a full service planner, book them as soon as possible, ideally before you book your venue. That way they can make sure that the venues that you're looking at are realistic with your budget. Now, the other end of the wedding planning spectrum, as I like to say, is called day of or month of coordination. Before we get into the benefits of having a day of coordinator, I need to address the title. If there are any planners listening, they're probably hating the fact that I'm even calling it day of coordination or month of coordination, because honestly, that title is super deceiving. Some planners call it event management or something different because they absolutely hate the phrase day of or month of coordination. So if you're looking at coordinators and you see that they don't have a day of coordination, still take a look at the services. They likely just don't call it day of coordination, although there are some planners that only do full service or partial. The issue with the name is that it implies that somebody simply shows up on the wedding day, sets up a couple of things, coordinates a little bit of the logistics, and then heads home. But the truth is, a professional, experienced planner begins the day of process at least 2 months before the wedding. We spend about 30 to 40 hours on our day of coordination weddings, and the actual wedding day only accounts for about 10 of those hours. So, regardless of how familiar we are with the venue or the vendor team we're working with, we need to make sure that we are looking at the specific logistics for this couple's wedding before the wedding day. If any planner tells you that they don't need that time and they can just show up that day, that is a major red flag. Unless they are doing this for you for free, you should not have a planner that tells you that they just show up that day or at the rehearsal. At minimum, you should be meeting with them a month before your wedding to go through the timeline and other logistics. All that said, day of coordination is best for couples who are fine with the planning process, but they know they want some help with the execution of the event. They don't want to be the ones in charge of setting things up or running the timeline with the vendors, making sure everybody is where they need to be. And they also don't want to assign that role to a family member or friend. Your day of coordinator will help you create and review your timelines, confirm all your vendors, and of course, run the show on the wedding day. You should be looking to book your day of coordinator about 6 to 12 months before the wedding if you have that time. Now, partial planning is another option that a lot of planners offer. And this category can really vary dramatically depending on how each planner structures their options. Generally speaking, though, the services typically fall somewhere between day of coordination and full service planning. And it makes it good for couples who need some extra help. So maybe they're having fun with the planning process, but they need some help with design or setting up their budget, but they can handle a lot of the like phone calls and other details that come along with planning a wedding. So a partial option really kind of fits in between those two. While you can book a partial planner before you book your venue, a lot of times I see couples come to us after they've booked the venue. They're having fun with the planning process, but booking the venue makes it feel real, and they just want to make sure that they're on the right track or that they get the help that they need in those little areas. Now, I go into much more detail about the breakdown of what wedding planners do, and more importantly, the major difference between a venue coordinator and an independent coordinator. So, somebody that works for the venue versus somebody that offers the independent services like I do. That's all broken down in the Wedding Planning Blueprint course, which is included with the Planning Collective membership. You can get more details on that over at planningcollective.com/membership. All right, that was a lot of information, but hopefully now you have a clear plan for how you're going to be booking out your vendors. Let's do a quick recap. Prioritize those vendors who can only do one wedding per day. Do your research, check reviews, ask for referrals, and don't be afraid to meet with multiple vendors before you decide. Go with your gut, especially when it comes to personality. It is going to matter for those vendors that you're going to spend a lot of time with. And finally, of course, consider hiring a planner. Even if it's just day of coordination, having a pro can make a huge difference in enjoying the wedding day. Again, make sure you grab the list of vendor questions, planningcollective.com/vendor questions, and you can get more support while planning your wedding in the Planning Collective membership. If you found this episode helpful, I would love it if you could leave a quick review. It seriously makes my day, and it helps more couples find the planning tips they need. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next episode.